What up, all you worship peoples? Thanks for joining me. I'm Nate Meist, and I love equipping worship leaders with helpful and encouraging content. And today we're going to be talking about playing in the C position and how to do that. Let's get into it. So before we get into today's video, don't forget that you can find some of my music. If you just search for Nate Meist out there in the interwebs on Spotify or Apple Music or MySpace or Tidal, whatever you listen to music on. Just search for Nate Meist and you'll probably be able to find some of my music out there. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, so feel free to hit me up there. Alright, so playing in the C position. You know, I made another video that I'll link above about playing in the G position. I'll also put a link to that video in the description of this video. But I think between those two positions, the G position and the C position that I'm about to teach you, you'll basically be able to cover any key that you need to play in for a worship song, which is pretty cool. Playing in the G position and using a capo can get you pretty high and give you a pretty wide range of keys. But to continue that range of keys, you just need to learn the C position and use the capo as well, and that'll get you around the bend. You'll be covering any key that you want to play in. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 4 major things about the C position. Number 1, why is it called the C position? A little bit of a theory lesson as to why it's called the C position. Number 2, we're going to go over all the chords, all the most common chords that you will find in the C position. I'm not going to cover every chord, but I am going to be pretty thorough, and I'm going to give you every chord you're going to need for any worship song that you will encounter. Number 3, we're going to talk about using the capo with the C position. And finally, number 4, I want to show you every key that you can play in using the C position and using a capo. Alright, so why is it called the C position? Well, much like my G position video, I explained there that it's because the starting note, the very first note in the C major scale is a C, which means that the starting chord is a C chord. And being that it's the first note, that means that, the C chord gets, the title of being the coolest. It's the first chord of the C major scale. So that's why it's called the C position. Now keep in mind that this is only true when your guitar is in what's called standard tuning. You kind of have this E, A, D, G, B, E tuning going on, and that's what is called standard tuning. So if there are no modifications made to the guitar, there's no capos on, the guitar's in standard tuning, and you play this chord, that should be a C chord right there. Which means that any chord within the C major scale that you play is going to be in the C position. So let's get into the chords that you will most commonly find within the C position. Basically what we're going to be doing is going up what's called the C major scale, okay? And a scale has 7 notes in the scale, which means that we're going to have 7 chords that we are going to learn that make up the C major scale. So let's begin with our first chord, again going back to the Mac Daddy chord of the C position, the C major chord. That's it right there. If you need to pause the video and take a closer look at this diagram, this chord diagram up here on this upper right hand corner, feel free to. I'm going to have this diagram for every single chord that I play in this video. So if you need to just slow down a little bit, take a breather, pause the video, feel free to. Just really study the diagram, see the positioning of my fingers on the strings and on the frets, and you'll be good to go. Now, when I taught you how to play the G position, whenever I played a C chord, it was with what I called these anchor notes that, you know, us worship leaders like a lot. These notes up here on the 3rd frets of strings 5 and 6. When you play in the G position, you actually keep those notes throughout the majority of the chords. And it's kind of nice because they kind of become these anchor notes throughout the chords. Now, when playing in the C position, I wouldn't recommend that you keep those notes. It just sounds kind of weird, and in my opinion, it sounds better when you play the C chord in the more traditional position here, with the more traditional fingering placement. Now, 2 variations that you will most likely see of this chord are, first of all, the C2. Basically, you just lift off this middle finger here off of the 2nd fret of the 3rd string and just let that string ring out. That's a C2. The other common variation that you might see with this chord is the C sus chord, or the C4. So for that, I'm putting my pinky here up on the 3rd fret of the 3rd string, as you can see in the diagram. And usually that chord is resolved by going back down to the normal C chord. Alright, we're going to start moving on up that C major scale. Our 2nd chord in the scale is going to be D minor. D minor. Now, one of the main things about this chord is that you want to make sure you do not play the 1st and 2nd strings. I wrap my thumb around the neck of the guitar and just lightly rest it over the 1st and 2nd strings so that it mutes it. So if I were to strike all 6 strings, it would sound like this. You're not hearing that 1st and 2nd string at all, which is what you want. Alright, the next chord in the C major scale that we are going to be encountering here is the E minor chord. It's a very sad chord. The E minor. Now, this is, you know, a classic E minor chord here, but this is not normally the way I would play this chord within the C major scale and within the context of a worship song. The most common way I would play this chord would be what you call a C over E. Have you ever seen those on those chord charts when you see a letter and then a slash and then a letter after it? That means that you're playing a chord, but underneath the chord, you're playing a note, okay? The 2nd letter in that something over something, or letter slash letter, the 2nd letter is what you would call the bass note, okay? And it's what the bass player would play as a foundation underneath the chord that's being played on top. So when I encounter this E, I'm going to put a C major chord above it. And that's the most common way you're probably going to encounter this chord in a worship song. And honestly, it just sounds, most of the time, it sounds the best. It sounds nice. It blends well with the other chords. Usually when you play just a straight out E minor chord, it's going to be intentional. Like the songwriter, whoever put that song together, they really want you to play just a full-on E minor chord in that song. Otherwise, it's probably most likely going to be a C over E, which means it's, again, a C chord over an E note, okay? All right, we are on our fourth chord of the C major scale, and that is going to be an F. It's a bright, happy little chord there. F major. Now again, I'm showing you kind of the more traditional way to play an F chord, but it's not really the way that I normally play it. You know, we worship leaders, we have a lot of cheats, you know, like we do some weird finger trickery and kind of get around chords to make it easier on ourselves. But in this particular instance, I actually like the way that I play this chord rather than just playing a traditional F chord. What I do, and this might be a little tricky for some of you, but over time you can get it. But I actually like to wrap my thumb around the neck of the guitar and play the F in the bass here to give it some fullness. And then what I do is I take off my middle finger, so I'm not playing that note anymore, I just kind of let that string ring out. And instead of playing both notes up here with my index finger, I only play this note, the first fret of the 5th string there, and then I let the 6th string just ring out. So it ends up sounding like this. Sounds pretty, it sounds nice. And in most contexts, it works just fine. This technically becomes an F major 9, but you don't need to worry about the names of the chords. You know, if you can play it, it's going to sound cool, and you're going to be good to go. So that's normally how I play the F chord in the C position. All right, we are on our 5th chord in the C major scale here, and that is going to be a G chord. You guys are super familiar with this chord. Again, I did the G position video, and the G is just like it's like a welcome friend, you know, in the worship song community. It's like, that's just a classic chord right there, the G chord. You'll notice that I am actually using those anchor notes that I taught you in the G position video when I play the G in the C position. So I am using those anchor notes in this particular instance. Now, just like the C chord, there are going to be 2 common variations that you might see of the G chord. The first is going to be a G2. You're just kind of letting that 2nd string just ring out. Don't put any finger on it. And the second most common variation is going to be the G sus chord. Put my index finger there on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. And that is a G suspended, G4, G sus, whatever you want to call it. And just like the C chord again, it's commonly resolved by going down to a normal G chord. Alright, we are moving our way up the C major scale here. Our next chord is a minor chord, and it is the A minor. A minor. Now, a very common variation of the A minor chord you will see is the A minor 7. Probably the most common way that I play this chord. I very rarely put my ring finger on that 2nd fret of the 4th string there. I just leave that off and play it as an A, what's called an A minor 7. And again, it's just one of those chords that within the context of a particular song, usually it's going to sound pretty nice and it's going to blend well with, you know, playing around with the other chords. The A minor 7. All right, we are on our last chord of the C major scale. Pretty exciting stuff here. It's the 7th note of the C major scale. The 7th note can always be a tricky note, but not when you play it like this. It's pretty easy and it'll get the job done. So the way that I play that 7th note, the 7th chord of the C major scale, is as a G over B. The 7th note of a C major scale is a B. But I don't play a B chord, I play a G over B. Just like I described before, when you say G over B, you're basically saying I'm playing a G chord, but with a B note in the bass. Okay, so that means that the lowest note you're playing is a B, but above that is technically a G chord. And that's what that looks like and what that sounds like. G over B. Alright, and that's it. We made our way all around the entire C major scale, which is pretty cool. Now, when using a capo, right, with the C major position, the C position, it's pretty simple. So, right now, there's no capo on the guitar. And what you have here, this kind of starting point, this white bar here is called the nut of the guitar. You know, that's your starting point. Up from there, it's, you know, this is 0, right? And then right here, this is fret number 1, fret 2, fret 3, fret 4, and so on. When you want to find your starting position for the C position, just go to that 2nd string, and you're going to count up to 4. So you got the first note, just the open string, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a C right there, and then you would, from there, build your chord based off of the positioning that I just showed you, right? So it's the same thing with a capo. You just count it up from the nut of the guitar. But when you put your capo anywhere on the guitar, it becomes your nut. That's kind of the starting point where you count up from. So go to that 2nd string again and count up to 4. So play that open note, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then build your chord, the same exact chord patterns that I just showed you. And you're in the C position, but now you're playing in E flat, which is pretty cool. Now, when using a capo, you want to be careful how high you go. And in just a moment, I'm going to show you every single key that you can play using the C position and using a capo. But, you know, like I taught in the G position video, you want to be careful how high you go with the capo, because the higher you go, the less energy and sound you're going to be able to produce with your guitar. The most powerful way that you can play the C position, obviously, is with 0 capo. Just take the capo off, and that's going to give you the most energy, right? But, you know, the more you put the capo higher and higher, the less juice your guitar has to produce noise and sound and energy and all that. Especially when you play by yourself, you want to be careful of that, because when you're by yourself, you want to give yourself the best chance of making the most amount of energy and having the best dynamics, right? So with that said, I would say I would probably go no higher than maybe the 7th fret. Okay, so if I put that on the 7th fret, that's going to put me in the key of G if I play the C position. Okay? And I would probably go no higher than that, because after that, I mean, even at that point, you're losing quite a bit of energy. You can still pull it off if you're by yourself, but it's going to sound a little weak. And it also depends on the guitar. I know this particular guitar doesn't take higher capo placements very well. It starts really thinning out. You know, you can obviously play with the action of your guitar and get it all set up and all that technical mumbo jumbo, and that can help as well. I have a Martin that I play from Sunday to Sunday. That guitar takes higher capo placements a lot better and still kind of produces a good amount of energy. So it depends on your context, your situation, your instrument, all that stuff. But yeah, just a general recommendation, just be careful how high you put your capo, and I probably would go no higher than the 7th fret. Alright, so now is the portion of the video where I teach you every single key that you can play in using the C position and using a capo. This is kind of like a reference that you can come back to at a later date, and it's also pretty easy to fast forward to this section because I have time-stamped every single section of this video. All you got to do is just go down to that little red slider bar at the bottom of the video, and it should have kind of different sections time-stamped within the video. You can just fast forward to this part of the video in the future if you need to, which is pretty cool. So let's go over every key that you can play in using the C position and using a capo. The first and most obvious key that you can play in is the C, the key of C major. So right there, I'm in the key of C. This is 0 capo, no capo usage, key of C. All right, let's begin here. Let's get into the good stuff. Fret number 1. Put my capo on fret number 1, and I am now in the key of C sharp or D flat. C sharp or D flat. Those are kind of peculiar keys, you know. Probably won't use those as much, but hey, you never know. C sharp, D flat. All right, capo on fret number 2, and now we are in the key of D using the C position. Fret number 2, key of D. Fret number 3, and now we are in the key of D sharp or E flat. D sharp or E flat. It's both of those keys simultaneously. Isn't that crazy how music works? Like, I can be in 2 keys at the same time. All right, fret number 4 with our capo, and now we are in the beautiful key of E major, using the C position. E is a pretty common key within the worship circles, worship song circles. I remember playing many Open the Eyes of My Heart using the key of E back in the day. All right, we're moving on up. Capo on fret number 5, and now we are in the key of F. The key of F using the C position. Capo is on fret number 5. All right, now we move on up to fret number 6 with our capo, and we are going to be in the weird key of F sharp or G flat. I've never played in this key. Well, maybe I have, but it doesn't come to mind. Yeah, this is F sharp or G flat. Our capo is on fret number 6. And as I recommended in the last section of this video, I am now on what I would recommend the highest fret that you should have your capo, fret number 7, and now we are in the key of G, which is crazy because that brings you full circle to the G position. So now you've made your way around. I mean, we're covering every single key now. All right, so now let's get into how to deal with your chord charts. Like, okay, so now Nate, you showed me how to play in the C position. You showed me every key that I can play in using a capo and the C position. What happens when I want to actually, put this into practicality here and go find a chord chart and play a song? What do I do? Well, here's what you do. You find your song, you find the key that you want to play your song in. You know, I like this song, I want to play it in the key of E flat. It just sounds best with my voice. Now what do? Okay, well, based off of what I showed you, you will remember that I had you put the capo on the 3rd fret in order to play in the key of E flat. So now you know your capo placement. Now what you want to do for your chord chart is you want to download it in the key of C. This is the tricky part, okay? Download it in the key of C, because then you're going to have all of your chords in the key of C, and all you got to do after learning those chord shapes that I taught you using the C position, you just got to use those chords, and you can follow along using the chart. But all you got to do is just make sure your capo is in the right placement, okay? You need those two things to align: correct capo placement, and then using the C position chord figures that I already taught you, and you'll be good to go. So that is our worship tutorial for today, guys. How to play in the C position. We talked about, you know, why it's called the C position. I showed you every chord, the most common chords that you will come across using the C major scale. We talked about using the capo and the C position together. And then we went over every key that you can play in using the capo and using the C position together. I hope this video helps you guys out in some way. There might be somebody out there that you got put into a worship leading situation that you weren't even expecting. You know, somebody stepped down or there was a transition and now you're the person. Hey, it's your turn. You are up. You're going to be leading us in songs every Sunday from here on out, and you just need a little bit of help. Or maybe you're just leading worship for your small group coming up this Tuesday night or whatever, and you just need some quick tips. Whatever it is, I hope that this helped you. If it did help you, why don't you give this video a like and maybe even subscribe so that you don't miss future worship tutorials. I'll see you guys in the next one.